Bio. Goodness is a law graduate at the Ebonyi State University and a junior researcher at the Lex Lata Center for International Law and Comparative Constitutionalism, where she explores the critical intersection of artificial intelligence, autonomous weapon systems, and international humanitarian law. She currently serves as legal researcher with Global Rights Watch, contributing to research and advocacy that promotes global justice and stronger humanitarian protection. Goodness has represented Nigeria at an international humanitarian law competition in Poland and has written widely on emerging issues in international humanitarian law, including publications with the Addis Ababa University International Humanitarian Law blog. Her academic and advocacy experience reflects the forum's core vision, strengthening humanitarian leadership for a more principled and humane future. We are very delighted to have you all here today, and we encourage you to engage fully, ask questions. There would be a question and answer session right after our speaker, Goodness's presentation. So do please get your questions ready, and our speaker will attend to them in time after her presentation. We also encourage you all to contribute to what we are certain will be an enriching discussion. Once again, welcome and thank you for joining. I would now hand over to our speaker, Goodness Itumo, to begin her presentation.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Good afternoon. I didn't expect this space to be so noisy, but I apologize for that. It's not usually this noisy. I hope that it doesn't interrupt our session. So I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully I'll confirm if you all can see it before I start presenting properly. Can everyone see my screen, please?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. I want to especially thank you for bringing out your time on this very hot Tuesday afternoon to come and listen to my presentation. I'm very, very grateful. And I'm also very grateful to the Lex Lata Center for giving me not only an opportunity to research, but also an opportunity to be able to share my research work to the public through this presentation. It means a lot to me, their supervision and their guidance throughout my research. This presentation is centered on the first chapter of my research. The topic of my research, as Betty has already said, is on autonomous weapons system and international humanitarian law, the regulation of modern warfare in the age of technology. For me, whenever I think about autonomous weapons system, what comes to mind are movies like Terminator, movies like Transformers, because it is in those movies that we see what we are talking about. Let's say prior to this coming years, let's say 2012, the discourse about autonomous weapons systems seemed a bit too futuristic. It seemed like things that we normally see in the movie. But we're seeing that coming now, it is no more something that is far-fetched. It's something that is currently being deployed, although no state has agreed openly to its deployment, but we know that it is happening. And this is fast changing what international humanitarian law means when it comes to war. So international humanitarian law is basically the body of laws that govern how wars are engaged or how armed conflicts are done. So it just brings to the question, it brings a few questions to mind. Questions like, is international humanitarian law ready for these changes? If it is ready, how? And if it is not, how can we better adapt? So we are seeing that we are entering the age where humanity is gradually phasing away in war. And that is what international humanitarian law is made for. That is to ensure that there is always humanity in war. And for us to be able to address this conversation of autonomous weapon system, we must understand how they function. We must understand what they are. And we must also understand the challenges that they have created or the loopholes that they have created in international humanitarian law. Because at the time this law was drafted as of 1949, these innovations, this part of technology was not envisaged. So the question now still remains, a law that did not envisage non-human actors, or a law that did not envisage that one day persons would not be able to wield certain machines. How can this law now address such a thing? So that is what my research is centered on. I'm a strong believer that humanity should always be in war. There should always be humanity in war. And that's what pressed me to go into this research, to know what are those lacunas, what are those gaps, and be able to identify them and propose ways of reform that can fill this lacuna. So war has changed, really it has. Over 4,000 years ago, we were familiar, or those that were there, rather, we are familiar with the kind of weapons that were used to fight. We would see guns, we would see bows made out of wood, we would see spears made out of stones, and kind of like familiar weapons that were not as dangerous as what we are seeing today. But we are seeing that with every new generation or with every passing year, there's always this innovation, this drastic change when it comes to weaponry. And why is that happening? It is happening because there's always need for military advantage. And this need for military advantage always drives the innovation of weaponry. So we saw from the spears, from the bows, we moved gradually to guns. And guns kind of changed our targeting system. We were able to stay a bit further and target, and we'll still strike our target. Then we got another part of innovation, which was the nuclear age. We got to the missile age. And this kind of like changed the trajectory of what war is, especially when it comes to targeting. We could see persons who could stay from China and target and strike the whole of, let's say, Nigeria, God forbid, but Nigeria. But just to say that you could, the dynamics when it comes to targeting change. We could see what happened in Hiroshima. We could see what happened in Nagasaki. So it's kind of like changed not only the effects of war, but also the effects of targeting. And also, we are seeing that this constant need for military advantage is not stopping any day. The more there is war, the more there is a need to evolve weaponry in a way that you are in a better chance of winning the war rather than the opposing party. Now, we are now in the age of autonomous weapon system. Before we go any further, I know that I would first of all give us a rundown of what autonomous weapon itself is. So I see that one of the most popular misconceptions when it comes to autonomous weapon system is that every weapon system is fully autonomous. But that's not true. Not every weapon system is fully autonomous, although my research is centered on fully autonomous weapons, but that's not the reality. You see, in autonomy, we have 3 stages or 3 types of human control. The first example is the human in the loop. Human in the loop means that a human being is always around. A human being is always in charge. But autonomously, a weapon system can target. Take, for example, let's say we are surveilling a particular area or a border in a particular country, and we see a vehicle approaching. If we have human in the loop weapon, what should ordinarily be done is to send a drone to go and surveil the area. The drone would approach said area, maybe see a vehicle that is approaching or trying to encroach boundary, and then say that, oh, there's a possibility, or this particular vehicle is carrying the military personnel from the other side of war or from the adverse party, right? And then it reports target secured. Should I shoot, confirm, or deny? So you are seeing here that it is left for the human to engage or to say strike. The decision-making power to whether to strike or kill remains with the human. Then you would see the human would maybe zoom in and see, oh, although that this vehicle is carrying persons from the enemy or the adverse party, this vehicle has the ICRC emblem, and therefore it should not be struck. And therefore it will now say disembark or do not engage. You see that human control is here. Then we also have another form of control, which is the human on the loop. This simply means that the autonomous weapon can do anything on its own, but there's always a human being at the operating system ready to override any action. Take, for example, same surveillance drone sees a vehicle. After assessment, sees that their military men from the other party and is about to strike, there may be a button that the operator can just click on to stop it from striking. So human is on the loop, meaning that human is at every stage of movement that autonomous weapon carries out. So now, on what my discussion is centered on the third category of human control, which is the human out of the loop. So human out of the loop means that immediately the weapon is deployed, human beings have no control at all again. The autonomous weapon can identify, can track, can engage, can surveil any single thing a weapon would ordinarily do, or a human being at war would ordinarily do. The weapon system can do it without any form of human engagement. And as scary as this sounds, like putting our lives or putting the lives of persons who are in areas that are affected by armed conflict, it's a bit scary because humanity is far from we are still far from integrating humanity into weapons. So it now begs the question, why would people want to deploy this kind of weapons? Why would people want to create them? There are several reasons why people want to create them. Firstly, for military advantage, which I've already talked about a bit. Then there's also the reason of having it reduced manpower. What one fully autonomous weapon system can do, 100 soldiers may not be able to do it. So you see that just buying one or purchasing one fully autonomous weapon system can save the amount of soldiers you have to employ. And it also kind of like increases precision. In short, there are so many advantages. There are so many reasons why countries would decide to purchase autonomous weapon system. So in seeing how autonomous weapon systems are fast advancing, there's come a need to look at the legal framework. And in looking at this framework, the current framework of international humanitarian law, some issues have been identified. Now, when international humanitarian law was drafted, as I've mentioned before, this kind of innovation and technology was not envisaged. And there are core principles of international humanitarian law that must always be maintained at any time. That is the principle of distinction, proportionality, and precaution. For the principle of distinction, it just means that in every strike you make, in every decision you make, that is going to be an attack to the other party, make sure you distinguish between civilians and combatants. Make sure you distinguish or differentiate between the civilians and civilian property and combatant properties. Civilians are highly protected or should always be protected during times of war. And this is why this principle of distinction is very important. Now we have the principle of proportionality. The military advantage you gain should not outweigh, the military advantage you gain, you should weigh it with the civilian harm it may cause. That is what proportionality means. And in precaution, in every attack you make, in every decision you make in the battlefield, be very careful so that your attack does not cause unnecessary and surplus harm to civilians. And now we are seeing that, okay, under international humanitarian law, the actors are seen as human, both the parties at war, both the weapons used are seen as things that are wielded by human beings. So now that we are seeing that the persons or the system that is carrying out, let's say, that commits a when, for example, an autonomous weapon is deployed and it goes and starts shooting at civilians or destroys civilian properties or causes massive harm to civilians, who takes the blame? We have several responsibilities when it comes to international humanitarian law. We have the state responsibility, as seen in the responsibility of states for internationally wrongful acts. We are seeing individual responsibility. We are seeing corporate responsibility. So in all these responsibilities, who takes the blame for sure? So ordinarily, people would say, oh, it's the states that should take responsibility. The states deployed, and also that the law clearly states that states are responsible for any actions taken by their military personnel. That's ordinarily true. But there's a lacuna here. And that lacuna is that intention is something that is very vital when coming to maybe the ICC or the ICJ. Those are the two courts that that the two international, very popular international courts. There are others, but for this particular discussion, I'll just concentrate on the International Criminal Court, International Criminal Court of Justice, then the ICC. Now, when you look at these two courts, intention is very, very, in fact, holistically, when we talk about crime, we have mens rea and actus reus. And these two elements are very, very crucial when you talk about holding someone criminally responsible. So the question now relating this back to state responsibility is, can a state be responsible for an act they did not intend? Did they intend that that weapon system would go into the battlefield and start shooting at civilians? Did they intend in their purchasing or in their making of that weapon? Or did they integrate anything that would make the weapon system attack civilians? These are the questions. And these are things that international humanitarian law needs to address. And also, we look at how weapon systems are. For those who use ChatGPT, you see that sometimes you type one thing, it gives you another thing. You see that it's all these the internet has become very easy to hack. Now we're looking at malfunction. We're even looking at cyber warfare, and using autonomous weapon system further opens us to an entry for cyber warfare, because it can be hacked. There could be malfunction. There could be algorithmic bias. We are seeing that before these weapons are launched, that they use kind of, let's say, a profile is uploaded of the kind of persons that are shot. What if something malfunctions and it's not able to read the codes properly and attacks the wrong person? Who takes the blame? All these things are things we need to consider. And right now, as it has to do with the discourse of autonomous weapon system, there is yet to be any unified understanding in the international framework of what the opinion when it comes to international autonomous weapon systems are. We see some states saying, oh, ban it, they are killer bots. We see some states saying, oh, don't ban it, regulate it. Some states are saying, let us not have anything like fully autonomous weapon. We are already in human in loop, so let's stop there. So these are conversations, these are the issues that need to be addressed, and I plan to address in the course of my research. Now, my research question is two. One is, to what extent are the existing international humanitarian frameworks suitable for regulating the employment of autonomous weapon system and AI in the conduct of modern warfare? You see, the thing is that there are laws that should ordinarily, cover this coming of autonomous weapon system. But the problem is, they are not direct, and they leave loopholes that other parties or war crime persons that wants to commit war crime can explore. Take, for example, we have international humanitarian law as a holistic body of laws of war, but under them there are other laws. Now we have the Geneva Convention, which is the most popular. The Geneva Convention has additional protocols, 2 additional protocols, and in all these laws there are 4 Geneva Conventions. There are 2 protocols. Only 1 article says something that we can stretch a bit to address autonomous weapon system. And that is in the Article 36 of the Additional Protocol 1, which says that with any coming of any new weapon, that there should always be some kind of an assessment to ensure that the principles of international humanitarian law can be upheld in the use of those weapons. That take for example, now, this particular article, although it does address, the coming of new weapons, that is autonomous weapon system, there is a difficulty here, and that is, even though it says, okay, that we should carry out assessment, there is no particular framework, or there are no particular steps on how this assessment should be carried out. Mean that states can carry it out anyhow they want. How do you check if these weapons tally with the principles of international humanitarian law? And that thing is that there are no enforcement bodies making sure that before weapon systems enter into the market, or before this weapon system are brought into the battlefield, that it complies with international humanitarian law principles. Another thing is also to the fact that we have the Hague Convention. The Hague Convention, in its first preamble, the Hague Convention of 1899, it clearly states the Martens Clause, which states that in every new evolution of war, whether it be weapon, whether it be any new method of fighting, or something that was not envisaged at the time of drafting the Hague Convention, that humanity and public conscience must always apply in war. And the problem now is that we're not talking about human beings. Does autonomous weapon system know anything about humanity? Does it have conscience? And those are the issues, because you cannot expect humanity from something that is not human. And have not heard of any record of weapons that have emotions, or weapons that are integrated with conscience. So we are living our lives to things or to systems that do not know the value of life. And you see that even though there's a law that ordinarily should govern it, it doesn't touch the surface yet in addressing what autonomous weapons system regulatory framework should be. Then we also have the UN. The UN has called for has called through its Office of Research for Disarmament, saying that by 2026, we should have a standard and binding regulatory framework for how autonomous weapons should be used. But as of 2013, we see that the Convention on the Certain Conventional Weapons have been gathering since 2013, after reports of the use of or deployment of autonomous weapon system was made public. They have been meeting up to 2024. Yet there is still no regulatory framework. And what is the reason for this? This particular committee or this particular convention, they built a sub-body, which is the group of governmental experts. And this group of governmental experts, before they can make any opinion, before they can propose any law, all the state parties have to agree. And they have to agree that this, or at least a high percentage of them have to agree on one thing. And now we're seeing cities like Brazil, Chile saying that, oh, ban autonomous weapon system, they are killer bots. We're seeing France, Germany saying, oh, let's not ban it, let's regulate it. So every party to that particular group has a diverse opinion. And this is still leading us back to, there is still no legal framework. Then we're seeing the Arms Trade Treaty. Under its Article 2, it clearly states the weapons that are governed, or weapons that must conform to the Arms Trade Treaty. There is no mention of the of autonomous weapon system. Although some researchers did try to stretch the definition or try to stretch the mention of the weapons there to say that, oh, since autonomous weapon system usually come in front of drones or aircraft, that the combat aircraft listed under Article 2 should ordinarily serve. But the question is, what if autonomous weapon system come in form of ships? What if it comes another form that we do not envisage? The Article 2 will no longer apply, and hence it will risk the transfer of very dangerous weapons to countries, that are currently undergoing armed conflicts. The only country as of now that has a solid law when it comes to autonomous weapons system remains the United States of America. And funny enough, it is not even for fully autonomous weapons. It just stops in weapons that have human on the loop. And in their position, they clearly stated that they do not believe that weapons should be fully autonomous. They only believe that humans should always be on the loop, and that is what their law is centered on. And of course, this still brings us back to, there is still no law, there is still no legal framework, because it is a domestic law and it only applies to the US. Now we're also seeing positions of organizations like the ICRC. The ICRC is saying that there is no need for this. There's also be humanity in the use of every weapon, and for that humanity to be protected, there has to be a human being wielding this particular weapon. And now it brings us to think, at this age of intelligent weapons, it has been there since 2013 and up to 2025. Still no binding regulatory framework, and the ones that are there have so much loopholes. So there's still a need to find a unanimous voice when it comes to international law, international humanitarian law, to say, oh, this is our position when it comes to autonomous weapon system, so that courts like the ICC, the ICJ can now from there be able to make decisions, or to be able to try persons or try parties who are involved in the use of autonomous weapon system. Now for the second research question, which is centered on how the existing international humanitarian law frameworks can be redesigned or configured to meet these challenges. This is part of what my research is going to address. And we also have the research objectives, these research objectives directly address the research questions. So I won't be going into that anymore. So we also have the methodology. The reason for choosing this particular methodology, because my research work is highly centered on legal framework, meaning that I'll be looking at different legal framework, academic opinions of organizations. So it's more realistic to use the doctrinal research methodology. Then I also have another reason for choosing it, and that is because conversations around autonomous weapons system in its use, its deployment is very controversial, and countries are not very open to information, or persons who are experts who ordinarily have this information are not always willing to, give it out. So it's a bit unrealistic to choose on doctrinal research methodology. So it's just better to use doctrinal research methodology until anything changes. Then of course my research can adapt to, let's say, cover the field. Then okay, sorry. So in the significance of my research, is centered on 4 things. The significance one is theoretical contribution. Now we're seeing that the current as of 2024, the UN General Council has charged the UN Secretary General to look into the body of work, whether in the academia, conversations around autonomous weapon systems, and find out what is the larger opinion when it comes to the use of autonomous weapon system. This will help build the voice of the UN as at what its stance is when it comes to autonomous weapon system. So my research would hopefully be adding to this body of work available for review. And we are seeing that in the second stance of the significance of my research work is also on policy impact. We're seeing that regulatory framework needs to be formed. We don't want our research to end in just having opinions, having reforms, having what should be done. It should also add to what the policy should be, what the regulatory framework should be. It should help policymakers to be able to decide that this is the way forward, or these are the lacunas. It should be an eye-opener for policy making. Also, I have practical contribution. And the practical contribution here is that we have military personnel who are deploying this autonomous weapon system. We have superior persons in the chain of command who want to know, how can we use autonomous weapon system in a way that conforms with international humanitarian law principles. So it is going to contribute to the practical use of autonomous weapon system. Then, of course, we have the societal benefits. It's going to enhance civilian protection. It's going to tell us the position, tell civilians, this is how you are protected. And it's going to further encourage humanity and public conscience when it comes to the use of autonomous weapon system. And I feel the need to mention this particular piece of information. Now, the only known use of autonomous weapon system as of now was in Libya. In 2021, Libya purchased an autonomous weapon from the Turkish government and deployed it. And after its deployment and after its use, investigations were carried out, and they totally denied that, they didn't use autonomous weapons. Their weapons were controlled by humans. But the UN felt the need to deploy its UN panel of experts who went into investigations of the use of the weapon, how the weapon was wired, how the weapon was structured. And after that, they saw that there's no sign that human beings wielded this weapon, and thus it's autonomous. So it just goes to say that it's kind of secretive. No country wants to openly say, we are deploying non-humans into the battlefield. So these are the reasons why we need to bring kind of like transparency in the use of autonomous weapon system. And this can only be done where there's a legal framework that charges parties that use it to be transparent in its manufacturing, its use, its deployment, and even its transfers. Now for the scope of my research. The scope of my research focuses on 3 things: autonomous weapon system, artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence comes in because it is what is integrated in autonomous weapon system to be able to identify targets, to be able to survey, to be able to use sensory data to find out who to target, who not to target, and all that. So artificial intelligence is very important when it comes to the discourse of autonomous weapon system, because it's artificial intelligence that gives it its autonomy. Then I'm going to be focusing on major world countries or major world developers of autonomous weapon. We have the US, we have China, we have Russia, and of course Israel. But as of now, I'm seeing that, or as of from research, I'm seeing that even countries like Nigeria, as of 2025, have begun to produce drones, and we're seeing countries like South Africa producing drones. So we're seeing that it is coming closer to our continent, and soon these drones would now become autonomous because we have already gotten to human on the loop. So we are not far-fetched from getting to the type part of weaponry where humans are no longer in the loop. And also, I'm going to look at accountability. Accountability framework is very, very important in this research because we need to justice after war is very important, and we need to know where this justice can be gotten from after war crimes have been committed, even if they use autonomous weapon system in the commission of war crimes. I'm also going to be doing an analysis of case laws, like I've said, the one that happened in Libya, and also expert states that are producing or deploying this particular form of weaponry. So this is the scope of the research. And I also have key issues that will be looked into. That is the question of, should human beings always be in the loop? We also have the accountability. We also have bias and error, escalation risk. Escalation risk means that the war zone is usually very dynamic, it's fast changing, and anything can happen. Anything that was not envisaged by the programmers of the autonomous weapon system can happen and change the dynamics of war. So how can autonomous weapon system be integrated in the legal framework to add these uncertainties that might happen in the battlefield? So these are the issues that my research is going to be looking at. And also have proposed reforms. These proposed reforms, however, are very subject to change because this is an ongoing research. And as I go on, I may see other ideas that are more realistic, because when we talk about reform needs to be very realistic and achievable. So my research may change what these recommendations are, but as of now, I'll just pick out two to talk about, and that is the implementation of risk under Article 38. Now, for this, but I think that there should be a review of Article 36 in a way that is actionable, in a way that there is an enforcement power, in a way that there is a structure that assures that these particular state parties that want to deploy new or novel weapons are able to carry out these evaluations. And also, when it has to do with transparency, we see that states are shying away from the conversations on autonomous weapon system. As of 2024, only very few countries, out of several countries we have that are members of the UN, attended the last meeting set by the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons to discuss autonomous weapon systems. So it's very important that state parties air their view on what the position of the law should be when it comes to the discourse of autonomous weapon system, and also that they are transparent in its development and its testing. So in conclusion, I still remain in the position that human beings should always be in the loop when it comes to war. And if for any reason humans should be out of the loop, that there should be not only a strategic, but a strong, enforceable, and realistic law that would allow for non-human actors to enter into the war zone. This is the only way that we can maintain humanity, public conscience, and ensure that the principles of international humanitarian law is upheld at every time, and civilians' hands are not left in the hands of heartless machines. Thank you so much for staying until this time for my presentation. It means a lot to me, and I hope you have your questions, and hopefully I will address them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, goodness. That was a lovely presentation. I'm very sure that everyone here learned so much. So it's time for the question and answer session. Anyone that has questions can drop them in the chat box, or if you prefer to, and if your background isn't noisy, you can raise your hand. I'll call your name so you can unmute and ask goodness her question directly. Okay, the chat box is open and we are ready for all your questions. Please feel free to ask whatever questions you may have during the course of the presentation so that we can answer you. Don't forget that you can also raise your hand if you prefer to speak rather than to type. I'm pretty sure we had a really interesting session. So once again, I would encourage everyone to ask their questions. Okay, so we do have one question. Okay. Okay, so Cynthia wants to know whether your research work will be available to the public. She would like to read it herself. So goodness, would you like to answer as to where she can?
Thank you so much, Cynthia. Of course, it should be available to the public. And if you connect with me on LinkedIn, I would make an announcement of when it is made public. Thank you.
All right, thank you, goodness. So for everyone, the research work will be available in due time. If you follow our LinkedIn page, or you can connect directly with goodness, reach out to her, and she'll let you know where you can find the research work so you can learn more about what she has spoken about today. We're still open to any questions, all questions that anyone has. Okay, so we have a question from Opemipo. The question is, the main challenges in, okay, I think the question is, what are the main challenges in ensuring compliance with international humanitarian law when deploying AI-driven weapons in real-time conflicts?
All right. Thank you so much, Opeyemi. If I get you right, you're asking if what are the main challenges in ensuring compliance to IHL when deploying AI? I think you mean autonomous weapons system. Okay, yes, okay. AI-driven weapons in real time. Okay, so the main challenge is that IHL was built around human actors in mind, right? So it was built around that human beings are the ones building these machines. It was built around that, oh, there will be a human being coming to court to, for accountability purposes. So the fact that this weapon system were not envisaged by international humanitarian law poses a challenge of, should international humanitarian law regulate something it did not envisage? And also in real time, when you are now for the part of in real time when you are deploying this particular weapon, the war system or the war zone is very, very dynamic, to the extent that something that was not, something that was not envisaged by the programmers can happen, that the weapon system may not be able to adapt to in real time. However, we do have artificial learning. That means that machines are now built in a way that they learn in real time. But the question is the learning enough when it comes to talking about is they adapting to the dynamics of war, or they are learning capabilities? Is it enough to just allow non-human actors to enter into the battlefield just because they are able to learn in real time? So, like, these are some of the issues. I pointed out the fact that they were not envisaged by international humanitarian law. Secondly, there is the fact that the war space is dynamic and anything can happen that was not envisaged. Another thing I'll talk about is algorithmic bias, which is sometimes programmers can make mistakes that will make the decision making of the artificial intelligence not to be neutral or to go beyond what international humanitarian law says. So those are some of the challenges that can be seen in the deployment of autonomous weapon systems in real time. Thank you for that question, Opemi.
Thank you so much. Opemipo, I hope that answered your question. If it didn't and you have a follow-up question, then you're more than welcome to type it in the chat box again. Okay, we have another question from Kamsi. Her question is there any clear legal framework for autonomous weapon system currently?
All right, thank you, Kamsi. As of now, there is none. Internationally, there is no legal framework that is clear as to the use of autonomous weapon system, because right now we are looking at not only having a legal framework that addresses use of autonomous weapon system, but even a legal framework that goes far back as to its manufacturing, its programming, its sale. So there is no body of law that talks about this in a whole and gives its perception in attending to the use of autonomous weapon system. As I mentioned before, there is a law in the US that is the Defense Department 3001, which is the legal framework that guides the use of autonomous weapon in the United States. But that's a domestic law and does not apply to any other country except the US. And it still brings us back to, generally in the international sphere, there's still no law that talks about or that addresses the use of autonomous weapon systems.
Okay, thank you, Goodness. Kamsi, I hope that has answered your question. Like I said to Opemipo, if you have a follow-up question, you feel free to ask. We have another question from Opemipo. The first one, it's a bit similar. I think you might have touched on it, but I'll ask nonetheless. Are there any ongoing international treaties to regulate autonomous weapon systems under international humanitarian law? I think you can answer that one before I dive into the second question, because he has asked too.
Okay, currently there are none. And the major reason for this is that for treaties to be born, countries have to agree, right? They have to be signatory to those treaties. And currently, different countries have diverse opinion when it comes to what the rule on autonomous weapon system or fully autonomous weapon systems should be. You see countries like, it's real. Countries like Brazil, they're having campaigns, rallies saying stop killer robots, they should not exist. When you now see other countries like France, you see Germany, you see the UK, they are saying that, oh, we shouldn't ban it per se, we should just regulate it. And the question is, with several countries and even several countries having diverse opinion, how can we then have a treaty that now guides how those countries with diverse opinion relate when it comes to the use of autonomous weapon system? So this is why there is no ongoing treaty or ongoing conversation that would necessarily yield fruit when it comes to actually getting a treaty that talks about the regulation of autonomous weapon systems.
Okay, thank you. Opemipo's second question is, what defines enforcement and accountability of mistakes made by autonomous weapon systems?
I don't quite understand the question. What defines enforcement and accountability of mistakes made by autonomous weapon system? Okay, if I get you right, my perception of this is what laws defines what accountability or what enforcement should look like when it comes to mistakes made by autonomous weapon system. Okay, during my discourse, I mentioned that ordinarily we have different forms of responsibility when it comes to war crimes or when it comes to violations of international humanitarian law. One of them is that the state's responsibility. So ordinarily, states should be responsible for any actions taken by their military personnel. But if you look at it, first of all, can we even say that autonomous weapon systems are military personnel? Because they are robots. So are robots now to be said that that they are, part of the military framework of a country? That's the first issue. Another issue is that there's always need for defining intention or finding intention. Now, when you want to prosecute someone or a person or a state, there needs to be a submission that says that, oh, we have done some kind of investigation and it shows that these people are kind of accountable for this. And one of the ways of checking this out is looking at intention. So when you look at the state's responsibility of states for internationally wrongful acts, which is not a binding treaty, but because of continuous usage, which is not a binding this law or documents, we see that even in this particular document, as of Article 4, says that they are liable for any actions of their military personnel. But we are seeing that intention is something that is very, very crucial. So we need to check intention, side by side accountability. And when you put it side by side, states can easily deny intentions to use the weapon system in committing crime. And also individuals that deploy, individuals that manufacture, or corporate entities that manufacture, they could easily deny that in their programming, in their use, in their deployment, that they did not intend that this weapon system be used for violations of international humanitarian law or for engaging in war crimes. So once mens rea is missing, criminal minds is missing. So it's kind of hard to bring accountability. And that's why we need a framework that says, oh, if you as a programmer fail to do this, if you as a country purchases this kind of weapon, then it doesn't matter what your intention is, automatically you are liable or will be held accountable for the actions of those weapon systems. I hope that addresses your question, Opemipo.
Opemipo, if you have some clarifications to make regarding the question, then you can drop them in the chat box so that we're sure that your question is answered directly. We have another question from Emanuela. Her question is, a lot of attention is on international organizations like the United Nations and governments to regulate autonomous weapons. But what can civil societies and individuals do to ensure this happens? What role would they have in shaping the use of these weapons in warfare?
Okay, for the discourse of autonomous weapon system, a lot of attention, yes, is to those organizations like the UN, the ICRC, because they kind of are the voice of international humanitarian law. But that doesn't take away the fact that civil society, the press, they have the press, individuals like those in the academia, there's a need for their voice to be joined. And that is why centers like Lex Lata Center gives room for researches to be done when it comes to these rising or emerging discourse. And one of the things, what their role is in shaping the use of this weapon is, one, bringing to light or bringing to light information they know about the use of autonomous weapon system. For example, in what happened in Libya, it was a report from a journalist that sparked the UN to carry out to charge the UN policy expert to carry out investigation that showed that these weapons are autonomous. So this is an example of individuals actually making reports, individuals bringing to light or contributing to the transparency of the use of autonomous weapon system. So our role as individuals or the role of civil society is to hold conversations like this, is to encourage accountability, to make publications, and to add to the already ongoing discourse of what the legal framework for autonomous weapon system should be.
Right, thank you, Goodness. So we have time for just one more question, and I can see Franklin's hand is up. Franklin, you can quickly unmute and ask your question directly to Goodness.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I wanted to ask the extent to which we could place liability on the host countries of some of the developers of this autonomous weapon system. And the reason for that is this is certain international judicial forum, particularly the International Court of Justice, only have jurisdiction in relation to states, which means you cannot sue a company there, right? And some of these autonomous weapon systems are developed by companies and yeah, companies essentially. If I just wanted to extend liability and use these institutions because of some of the advantage they might want to offer, and for instance, a weapon developed by a company in the United States, was used just somehow, let's say in Nigeria. Nigeria just wants to enforce this to sue. They don't they want to use the ICJ. Is it possible to extend the liability or place responsibility on the host state? And what kind of standards should we be expecting in that regard?
Okay, Franklin, your question kind of spans through a lot of things, but first I'll start with the fact that ordinary ICJ doesn't have jurisdiction to try individuals, right? However, the ICC can try, they say, for example, the owner of the corporation, because there is corporate responsibility when it comes to the types of responsibilities under trying persons for war crimes. Why it's not very popular, or why it's very difficult to hold manufacturers culpable for not culpable, accountable for how the weapons they produce is used in another country, because there is usually end user compliance agreement which parties are made to sign, whether when purchasing directly from the manufacturers or being transferred from state to state. So this kind of like exonerates states from liability when it comes to how the weapon is used. As far as this end user compliance agreement is, it states categorically that this weapon system should not be used, or this weapon at all should not be used in a way that it goes against the principles of international humanitarian law, or in a way that it results to a war crime rather. Then the states will not be held, the production, the manufacturer rather, would not be held accountable because there was prior warning, and that end user compliance agreement kind of gives notion that the states did not intend, or sorry, the manufacturers did not intend that the weapon should be used in contrary to contrary to the principles of international humanitarian law. It's just like saying that, oh, if I sell a gun to someone as someone who is licensed to sell gun, if the policeman, let's say, for example, I sell gun to the states and the state gives it to the military personnel or to the police, then they use it to go and commit war, hold me for committing the war crime, so the weapon to them. But it is a different thing when we say that those weapons, they say there are mistakes in the making of the weapon, whether it's in the programming or whether they use, let's say, cheap materials that made the weapons to malfunction. I think that's a way that you can bring about corporate liability when they failed in their own part in the production that then resulted to the war crime. But if it's the war crime resulted just in the use of those weapons, then it's very difficult to hold those corporate entities or those manufacturers accountable for the actions or how the state decides to use the weapon. Thank you, Franklin, for that question.
Thank you, Goodness. Franklin, I see your hand is back up. We're really pressed for time, but I would allow you to just ask your final question. So Goodness responds, and we can bring the session to a close. So you have the floor.
Thank you, Betty. Thank you so much. Okay, so yeah, Goodness, thank you for that. My question actually points directly to where there is some negligence or some failure in terms of the program, because I'm just sticking to the fact that these are autonomous weapons and there is some level of autonomy in their operations, even though, of course, there has to be some level of oversight in that. Now, I'm just saying, I understand the fact that the ICJ has no jurisdiction to try parties other than states. And the end user, which may be a state, let's say a state, a sovereign entity purchases this weapon from these corporations. And after purchasing all of this, and in the course of using it, this product eventually lead to commit some acts which are, of course, are contrary to international law. And the states just wants to make use of the ICJ machinery just because of whatever advantage they stand to gain using that machinery. And they can't sue the company, of course, or the corporation which produced those weapons before the ICJ. I'm just trying to say, what's the extent of the exposure of the host state, the state under which that corporation is incorporated in relation to the protection of these weapons? Can they argue that since you had the power to regulate it and somehow they failed to regulate, would you be exposed to some liability? That is what I'm just trying to raise a theoretical question to look at what could we be considering and whether they might be able to sustain such a claim before the ICJ in relation to the host states. That's what I'm asking.
Okay, I get your question now. You are saying that since states cannot take the manufacturers to the ICJ, why not take the host states to court instead? Okay. I would say that where I have had this kind of stretch when it comes to liabilities, when we are talking about non-state actors and allowing let's say rebel group to operate from a state, then what can a state be taking to the host states of the rebel group be taking to the ICJ because of the crimes committed by the non-states, by the rebel group. So I'm kind of going to use that to draw, though this calls for more research, but from what I can say now on that is that it depends. Did the state put in regulatory frameworks to ensure that in the manufacturing of those products, that they are manufactured in a way that it does not go against international humanitarian law? Let's say, for example, now, in the manufacturing of autonomous weapons system, they say, oh, that this is the degree of autonomy we allow in the production of weapons in our area. Or they say that, okay, in every autonomous weapon you produce in our country, that you do not allow it to shoot more than said kilometer square, or you do not use it to destroy certain this, that. Then I think if the state puts in concrete legal frameworks to ensure that it complies with international humanitarian law, then there is no way the states can be held, can be brought to the ICJ to answer for the actions or the resulting actions of those weapons. However, if the state is negligent in regulating the affairs of the manufacturers in this area, then I think it's possible that another state can sue the state for negligence or for failing in curbing entities that produce weapons in their own state. I hope that kind of gives us a highlight of my position when it comes to this question. Thank you.
Thank you, Goodness. And that brings us to the close of the session. Thank you all for being part of today's session, and a very special thank you to Goodness Itumo Sochima for her insightful and timely presentation. It shows a very in-depth research. We would also like to say a big thank you to Dr. Kunuji, the Executive Director of the Lex Lata Center. Today, we learned that autonomous weapons sit at one of the most complex intersections of law, ethics, and technology. Today's discussion has given us much to reflect on as we consider how international humanitarian law can respond rapidly to evolving forms of warfare while still safeguarding human dignity and accountability. On behalf of the Lex Lata Center, we appreciate your engagement, your thoughtful questions, and your commitment to advancing meaningful dialogue in this field. So once again, thank you to everyone for joining us today, and we look forward to welcoming you for our next sessions. So with this, we come to a close of today's presentation. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you for joining.